Welcome, everyone. My name is Nicole Williams, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County, Maryland, a nonpartisan organization that does not endorse candidates or support political parties. I assist them in the areas of technology and content creation. In ordinance with our mission to empower voters and defend democracy, we sponsor webinars to inform the public on important issues. Today, public infrastructure is more than roads and bridges. Closing the digital divide is important for improving education, economic, health, and political equity. Our National League supports public policies that can close this gap, and Montgomery County is currently increasing broadband service locally by expanding infrastructure for 5G mobile technology. While the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County has no formal position on such policies, we do want to know what questions local officials are asking in the process, and how can residents understand the impacts of this effort. Tonight's panel will discuss more, and an audience Q&A will follow after their presentation. But first, some housekeeping details. This webinar is presented by the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County. This meeting is being recorded and currently live streaming on YouTube. The replay can be watched immediately after this broadcast ends. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, turning on all notifications for the latest updates. Also, be sure to share this event with everyone you know. I've been advocating for this discussion for a long time and truly want more resident voices involved. I must thank our program planning co-chairs, Cynthia and Amelia, for finally taking a closer look at this topic. They put a lot of work into these events, so likes and shares go a long way and are very much appreciated. Now, the audience will be muted during the webinar, and the chat box has been disabled for attendees to minimize distractions. After our speakers make their presentation, we will have a Q&A session. Questions will be visible as they are answered. We encourage you to ask questions, but please be respectful of our speakers and each other. To submit questions, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question in the box, and hit send. We will answer as many questions as time allows. The program is scheduled to end at 8:30. Now, I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. First, Theodora Scarato is the Executive Director of Environmental Health Trust, a scientific think tank focused on prevention and the intersection of environmental, health, and technology issues. Scarato has published several research articles on wireless technologies and health. Second, we have Mitsuko Herrera. She is a program director for the Montgomery Connects, the county's digital equity program. Montgomery Connects assists residents with getting home laptop computers, broadband subsidies, and technology skills and training. And finally, Sabine Neschke. She is a policy analyst on business and technology issues for the Bipartisan Policy Center. She has published reports on national broadband coverage and federal regulations of emerging technology. Now I am pleased to invite our first speaker, Theodora Scarato, to begin our program. Theo?
Thank you so much. I am really glad to be here. I'm a longtime Montgomery County and Prince George's County resident, haven't left the Beltway, and I got interested in this issue as a social worker in Montgomery County schools now over 2 decades ago, and dropped into the health issues related to telecommunications and the way technology is being rolled out because of the ever-growing science indicating actually harmful effects, incredible science, as I'm going to discuss. So let me share my screen. 1 second. So there's a lot of talk about the digital divide. And in the urban and suburban areas of Montgomery County, I think that the issue is really about affordability. So the access issues have to do with affordable service, affordable computers and upgrades, and access to training and education so people can use devices and technology as it should be used to connect. I believe that Montgomery County is cutting corners when it comes to bridging the digital divide and connecting the unconnected, and making serious mistakes in its approach in some ways, not all. I know that Mitsuko Herrera will be talking about some important Montgomery County programs that really are working and so important. However, in addition, the county is implementing zoning changes that purports to be about the digital divide, but I don't believe that it's actually going to do so. And in fact, it's elevating the radio frequency radiation levels. Those are the cell tower radiation levels ambient in the environment. So the slogan, bridging the digital divide, has been used to promote many regulatory changes by elected officials, both at the federal, state, and local level, and to fast track wireless networks because we need to bridge the digital divide, we're told. And in fact, in Montgomery County, we passed a series of ZTA's zoning changes that fast-tracked 5G and wireless antennas into neighborhoods, in front of homes, workplaces, and schools. Now, these zoning changes have been termed sweetheart deals or corporate-friendly changes because they took away the meaningful ways that communities had in the past been able to participate in a decision-making process around how the technology was deployed. And routine notice, routine hearings were removed from ZTA 1907. There was an earlier bill that changed the way that kind of the setbacks between cell towers in non-residential zones. And so here we are where this is a apartment building with a cell antenna on the top, and one of many installations, and a growing number we expect as these zoning changes become more implemented by more and more wireless applications. Now, this is the head of the CTIA, that is the wireless industry lobby group in the United States, and she's promoting 5G, talking about how it is about closing the digital divide. And she says, I know we can do this because we've done it before for 3G and 4G. And this is the recent 5G summit that was actually just held. And I would say, how was the digital divide bridged in 3G and 4G? Why is that even being stated? In fact, there are, actually, I'll tell you what this image is. This is an image from the Irregulators, which is a group of telecom lawyers and experts who argue that wireless companies themselves, along with the cable companies, created the digital divide many years ago. And in fact, we, the consumers, have actually paid for upgrades to our wired and fiber networks on our phone bills for years, and companies got government subsidies, and yet the networks were not maintained, not equitably deployed, and there's been no government accountability around really doing what was promised in terms of building out and keeping those networks strong and accessible for all. And if you're interested in that, you can read what Bruce Kushnick has to say and the Irregulators. In fact, his latest blog post goes back to the early telecommunications deployment in the 90s, where groups cautioned that the networks were not being equitably rolled out. And they stated companies were planning to bypass poor neighborhoods and minority populations. And digital redlining, in fact, is what happened in many communities and remains today. Now, here we are, decades later, with 5G being rolled out that promises to tie everything together and be the next best thing. And there's a US government accountability report on 5G that concluded that the experts that they talked to believe that 5G deployment would actually exacerbate disparities in access to telecommunications and would likely widen the digital divide. And that's because there's a lot of promises, but not measurable performance goals with strategies and measures to assess and to mitigate the inequitable deployment, and to ensure that actually there will be access for all. So history seems to be repeating itself. And I haven't seen, certainly not in the county, any accountability as well on being that these new ZTAs allowing cell towers 30 feet from homes was supposed to connect the unconnected. Where's the data on how that's working, and how are we gathering that data, and what are the effects? And none of that has actually, that I know of, is being done around the 30-foot setback that we have in place. So 5G also means purchasing new 5G devices. We have to upgrade to 5G phones, 5G routers, 5G smart devices. Your phone won't work, for example, if you have an iPhone 11 or lower with 5G. And low-income families who already can barely afford or can't afford monthly service or are smartphone dependent will not be able to afford the new cell phones and fancy 5G devices. This is not a mushroom. It is a wireless antenna, like a cell tower, sitting on top of an apartment building. And the question I ask is, is everyone in that building connected? Are they all using computers in the way that can be used to bring the most, services and employment to the families who live in there? Or are they smartphone dependent? And do they need 5G? What are they using? And what are the radio frequency radiation levels from the antenna sitting right there on top of it? And is anyone assessing that? Is anyone checking? Cell towers and cell antennas, if they're mounted on buildings, they all emit radio frequency radiation. This is a non-ionizing electromagnetic type of radiation. It is an increasing environmental exposure. This has been documented over and over again in many studies. And you can go to ehtrust.org, which is our website, and go under the 5G tab to see many of these studies. The image I have is from one of the studies that found, they looked at South Carolina, a city in South Carolina, and they were doing measurements around the small cell deployment there. And they found that the levels were elevated, really those in close proximity to the antennas. So this is a street light. It's got a antenna on the top. And this is to sort of simulate or to show the readers how there are main beams and then less coming out. But this main beam, if you see, goes into the building right here. And this is what scientists are very concerned about around the world. Hundreds of scientists have published appeals, the EMF scientist appeal. There was recently a UK appeal calling for reducing exposure, not increasing it. And these installations are increasing exposure. This is what's going on in New York, where there are 2,000 of these massive 5G towers that are being installed, some 10 feet away from apartment buildings, more in the they called equity districts, or districts that have been identified as underserved. And the New Yorkers are not very happy. 15 community boards have issued resolutions opposing these installations because they're so close to their home, because of the property value devaluation and the environmental issues, and also because they're not bringing they're being purported to bridge a digital divide, but actually the majority of the antennas that are going to be on these installations are for-profit companies. So you might ask, well, how, what is safe, or what rules does the government have? And our US limits for human exposure to cell phone radiation and cell tower radiation, these levels were set in 1996. They are based on protection against short-term microwave overheating, because radio frequencies are microwaves, low-level microwaves. They're actually based on a handful of studies from the 70s and 80s, where small animals were trained to press a lever to get food. They were starved, and then the level of radio frequency was elevated, and when those animals stopped pressing the lever for food is when the scientists identified that that was the level of harm, that the overheating caused these behavioral disruptions. And there's maybe around two dozen animals in the studies that the standards actually point to when it comes to identifying this threshold of harm. These were not large studies. They weren't long-term studies. They were under an hour studies. And that's how the level was first identified. The FCC set these limits in 1996, and they're not based on biological effects like cancer or headaches, a variety of other effects that have been associated with exposure in long-term studies. They are for short-term acute exposures, not for long-term effects from long-term exposures. They're not about the current kind of exposure we have, where we're exposed everywhere we go to these increasing levels from many different devices and sources. Nor do they account for like the 5G modulation or the newer kinds of technology that we have that many scientists have stated is more biologically active to our bodies, nor do they address children's vulnerability. Children have more sensitive brains and developing physiology, and they have been considered more vulnerable to radiofrequency radiation by many medical organizations, including the American Academy of Pediatrics. So in 2019, the FCC decided to keep its limits for wireless radiation, even though they had a record of hundreds of studies that had been presented to them, and many scientists saying you need to update your limits, including the American Academy of Pediatrics. So at that time, Environmental Health Trust, our organization, as well as other organizations and petitioners, petitioned against the FCC. And we had a favorable ruling in the case, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but I want to show you this graph. This shows the variation in levels. There are many countries that have levels that are similar to the US FCC. We have the most lenient levels, the less stringent levels compared to many other countries, along with Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and actually several other countries in terms of what we allow for cell tower radiation. India dropped its levels to 1/10 of what they were after they reviewed the science on wildlife and impacts to people. China and Russia, Italy and Switzerland have much more stringent limits, some only for sensitive areas or areas that they've identified where people spend a long time or like inside the home, such as Switzerland. They have a kind of a tiered system of limits. And just for perspective, as you look at these limits and think, well, okay, China and Russia, they have acknowledged biological impacts actually for many years now and have quite a robust research program in their countries, whereas the US FCC does not, the US does not. But many scientists say even these levels are not protective because, for example, the LA school district, which has banned cell towers near their schools, developed a cautionary level for radio frequency 10,000 times lower than FCC regulations because they state that children need to be, they're a more vulnerable population. And in the court decision, the court had a favorable ruling in terms of our putting forward that the FCC had ignored science on long-term exposure, children's vulnerability, the testimony of people who'd been injured, and impacts to birds, bees, and trees. The FCC was mandated to respond to show how its limits were protective in these areas in 2021, and they have not responded. And in fact, the question is, how can Montgomery County rule out all of these new installations and greenlight them in front of our homes if all of this science has not been adequately reviewed? And I'm going to just quickly share a video of Frank Clegg, former Microsoft Canada president, talking about this. Sorry about that. typo. I just put that together, talking about the health effects, and also Dr. Anthony Miller, who's one of our scientific advisors, talking about his conclusion, along with many other scientists, that radiofrequency radiation is actually a carcinogen. See if it works.
I've spent over 40 years in the technology industry. My most recent position was president of Microsoft Canada, and I've seen the tremendous benefit technology can provide. I've also seen the potential harm if technology is not used correctly. In my opinion, our current implementation of wireless technology is not safe. I've met with experts from institutions such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and the University of Toronto. And I've met with an expert advisor to the World Health Organization and one of the lead scientific writers for Al Gore's team that won the Nobel Prize. Over 250 scientists from 40 countries signed a formal appeal to the World Health Organization and the United Nations member states expressing their concern over the harmful effects of wireless technology, and added an additional appeal for the effects of 5G, especially the effects on children. Hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers have been published demonstrating harm to humans and the environment. This evidence includes increase in cancer, sperm damage, reproductive harms, memory and learning deficits, especially in children, and damage to our DNA, nervous systems, and the cells in our bodies.
The combined evidence, in my view, is that there is now sufficient evidence that radiofrequency radiation is carcinogenic to humans. That's IR category 1, and you can't ignore that. And the implications of this, we have to be cautious. Radiofrequency radiation is now ubiquitous. We're probably exposed to it in this room, even though we do not want to be. And we know that although the risk per individual is low, the radiation is widely distributed. I was astounded when I went up one of your peaks to find the cell tower at the top of the tram. My goodness, what are they doing to people? And when we continue doing this, this could result in major public health problems.
And there are also environmental issues, which really are the regulatory gap of, I think, one of the most important issues. You know, we have birds, bees, and trees. They're very close to all of these antenna installations, with growing science and that, you know, shows effects at very, very low levels. In fact, there was just a study that looked at 1,200 studies, a review, 3-part review by several US experts that found broad effects, biological effects across all species and at vanishingly low levels compared to today's ambient exposures. And that is the effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic fields on flora and fauna, which you can look up if you're interested in that issue. It's something that we're working on in Environmental Health Trust now, including impacts to trees. This is a study on how radio frequency injures trees around mobile phone base stations. And what they did is follow trees for several years. Over the years, what they found is impacts on the side of the tree. They also measured the radiation levels on each side. And over time, some of the trees had to be felled and the canopy was damaged, which of course is another critical issue, which will, you know, trees are so important for climate, and climate is a whole other issue as well, which I think I'm running into time right now. So I'm just going to close up to say that we need to be protecting our environment. This is a ProPublica article that just came out about the FCC and how it is not following the environmental laws. And with 5G and the green lighting, there is even more just unfettered proliferation of antennas. In addition, the New Hampshire Commission report on 5G, I really recommend, if you're interested, to watch Dr. Kent Chamberlain, who is part of that committee, talking about their recommendation after a year of review to have wireless antennas set back from homes and schools by 1,640 feet. But then who can afford to move? Who can and who can't? Here's a cell antenna in front of an apartment building, 27 feet from the building. Urban areas have a higher density of wireless networks, resulting in higher environmental levels. Apartments in line of sight will be in the main beam with elevated levels, likely generally inside near the line of sight of the antennas. And when it comes to 5G, for example, the low and mid, the lower ranges, which are being used by many companies, do go through the building. They do not bounce off the skin as has been stated. In fact, frequencies don't bounce off the skin. Higher frequencies, which are going to be used, don't penetrate as deeply, but there are other effects, which perhaps in the Q&A I can talk about. And here's another apartment building with an antenna in front of it. We have situations like this. I don't know who can afford to easily move. We have high schools with cell antennas put in, and the majority have been found to be disproportionately placed on schools with higher free lunch rates. There are property value impacts, in Montgomery County's own legal filings detail how the deployments of small cells could affect property values with significant potential effects. And there's actually 2 filings that the county put together. And there's going to be a disproportionate impact there. More modest homes with less land and smaller front yards will have closer cell towers. And people with more financial resources, again, can easily move. And also there's just the aesthetic blight in the community and the different way that these are being deployed, depending on if there's undergrounded facilities or not, which I don't have time to go into. I just want to mention rooftop antennas, where there's zero oversight or enforcement regarding the rules related to RF radiation, at least that we know of. And there are many regulatory gaps in the county. There's no checking for what the levels are. There's no monitoring. There's no yearly checks to ensure compliance, no oversight. And yet there's this fast tracking going on to bridge a digital divide. But where is the documentation that these new zoning rules are actually doing what they are purported to do? So I know my time is over, and I'm glad to answer more questions in the chat as well. Thank you so much. In the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Amelia. Theodora. I was having some technical difficulties there. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Okay, now we will move on to our next speaker, Sabine Neschke. Can you hear me, Sabine?
Great. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Just going to share my screen as well. Give me 1 second. Awesome. Can you see that okay?
I can't.
Not yet.
Okay. There we go. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So thank you again for having me here today. I get to work on issues mostly at the federal level. So it is interesting for me to get to share what we're seeing at that level, and then also see how it's affecting the local areas. Broadband technology and closing the digital divide has been one of the issues that I've been following for the past few years. So excited to get to share that research with you all. So I'll start by explaining some of the federal or just some of the benefits and challenges of 5G technology, go into the investments by the federal government to improve connectivity generally, and then reasons why 5G might not be as effective at bridging the digital divide as we might have thought. So just to start off, Theodora gave a great deep dive into some of the effects of 5G, but just want to back up and just introduce what this technology is and what people are promoting from it. So 5G gives faster download and upload speed. It enables significantly faster data transfers compared to previous generations of 3G and 4G. It has lower latency, which means that the wireless transmissions take less than 10 milliseconds. That's faster than it takes for our brains to process what our eyes see. So that's just an example of how fast this is going. That's critical for real-time applications such as video downloads or using GPS at a large capacity. It also gives greater capacity to connect many devices. That's going to be important for future technologies such as immersive virtual reality technology, self-driving cars, or just IoT devices. It's also important for environmental reasons. It's going to greatly improve precision farming that requires many sensors around the farm and different technologies. And then lastly, it's a great alternative to home internet. So there's something called fixed wireless access, which provides similar broadband access as a fixed network, but it does it over a wireless connection. So this is just a quick visual to show, the upgrades in the speeds. So we started off with 3G, jumped to 4G, and exponentially greater, we're now at 5G speeds. We're not always reaching this capacity, and I'll go into some of that detail as well. That maximum speed can only really be experienced right now in densely populated urban areas. The infrastructure involved and the way that providers are offering 5G networks is just a lot more effective in these densely populated areas. Just want to make sure I'm still presenting, sorry. The next point here is the costly infrastructure build out. So implementing 5G requires a substantial number of antennas and base stations to ensure that you get effective coverage. So that's just a significant infrastructure investment. Additionally, object penetration, 5G in urban areas, when it's on high bands, will produce millimeter waves. And that has limited ability to penetrate walls and objects, requiring unobstructed paths between the devices and the base stations. So that's a quick background on 5G. This is just a visual to show how it's used in different areas. In urban areas, it uses the high band, as you can see, producing a lot stronger of a signal, but it does get affected by different objects and walls. It can't reach as far. The mid-band and low band are mostly used in suburban or rural areas to produce greater widespread signals that can go through objects and trees and buildings, but will give off a signal that's relatively similar to 4G. It's not as big of an upgrade in what people are promoting. So now I just want to show how the federal government is investing in 5G. Because 5G will require significant investments, we've seen the government play a substantial role over the past few years. A couple of bills that you might recognize, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the CHIPS and Science Act, invested billions of dollars into promoting broadband infrastructure, closing the digital divide. Some of that was targeted towards 5G wireless upgrades. Some of it is just building the backbone infrastructure. 5G is going to require a lot of infrastructure beyond just the local antennas. So creating fixed wireless access is also important. And then the FCC 5G Fund for Rural America put $9 billion towards deploying 5G services specifically, with $1 billion of those dollars going to network developments that deploy for precision agriculture. So that's going to be really important in spurring those environmental effects. Now I just want to go through some of the roadblocks. So as we've said, federal government's trying to promote this new advancements, the FCC, NTIA, working towards this future generations, but there have been a few roadblocks in the way. One of the biggest ones is spectrum allocation. Spectrum is a very limited resource. As you can see on this graphic, each band of spectrum is already very densely populated and being utilized in a number of different ways. So finding available spectrum has been a great challenge, and there's many efforts underway to upgrade the technology, find new ways of overlapping these spectrums, but just want to point out that this is something going on and many agencies are working on it. You have also the coordination between NTIA, the FCC, and the international standards body, helping free up that spectrum for future generations. The next issue I want to talk about is the broadband availability maps. So these maps recently were misrepresenting the actual available broadband available to homes and schools around the country. Previously, the data displayed each census block data. So if one home on a census block, and especially in rural areas, census blocks are huge and can be acres wide. If just one home had access to broadband, then it would be recorded that everyone on that census block had access. And that was misrepresenting a lot of things. So recently, they redid these maps, got much more granular data, and went out and asked everyone to go and check the spectrum or the available coverage in their area and see if the maps were accurate. So this was a great way to, work with people and communities to see if the data that they were getting was actually representing the real life experience data. So, as these maps improve and as they get more accurate information, they'll have more information to inform the government funding and subsidy distributions. That's going to play a really important role in the coming years as the funds that I was just talking about previously actually get allocated to the communities. And more accurate information about why Americans remain underserved or disconnected from the internet will also help inform these decisions. It can also prevent overbuilding in areas where high-speed broadband already exists. The next point is affordability. This is a major factor in why many people remain offline. Affordability, the Affordable Connectivity Program and Lifeline Program are two federal programs that subsidize the costs of getting online. These programs are important because they're enabling people to access services such as education and telehealth, but it's difficult to actually see who's utilizing these programs, how effective they are on the ground. I don't think they have the best data recorded about them, and the information on these programs is hard. And as they look to these as the best path forward, maybe there are other ways, but just not enough evidence to tell. And then the last issue I'll talk about is permitting. We've heard from members of Congress saying permitting processes are duplicative, they cause unnecessary delays and slow down efforts to close the digital divide. The Communications and Technology Subcommittee recently marked up 28 bills that try to address this issue and other issues around providing high-speed broadband services to Americans. So those are some of the roadblocks, but in general, I just want to wrap up this presentation by saying how important it is that the government be transparent in its 5G policymaking to ensure it actually benefits all Americans and it's deployed in a fair, cost-effective manner. I think greater insights into how these investments are being used to close the digital divide at the federal level affect the local areas. So it's important for that information for this all to work. And then finally, networks typically have a lifespan of about a decade. We're seeing 3G sunsetting now as 5G gets deployed. So careful planning and forward-looking strategies are necessary to build future-proof infrastructure that can accommodate the technology as it advances beyond 5G as well. So thank you so much, and I will turn it back over.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Very insightful presentation. Okay, finally, I would like to invite Mitsuko Herrera.
So let me pull up my presentation. Do the share screen. All right. So my name is Mitsuko Herrera. I am the director of the Montgomery Connects program. It is the county's digital equity program. I also assist the county in federal regulatory matters and have been working on the 5G as well. I want to give you a quick update of some of the things that Montgomery County is doing to advance digital equity. If I can, there we go. Yeah, okay. All right, so first thing is, just so that we're all on the same page, that digital equity we view as a state where everyone has access to some kind of home computing device. They have affordable home and mobile internet, and they have the digital skills, which is very important to be able to use that for education, employment, connecting to their friends and families, and really just sort of all of the sort of civic participation in daily living. Similar to what the League of Women Voters helps to promote. The digital divide is the gap between people who have those things and people who do not. And the digital inclusion is the work to close that. And digital equity, we also view as a way to help Montgomery County community partners accomplish their missions, because what we found, particularly in COVID, is that a lot of services moved to online, they moved to electronic. And so not having access to those things impacted most severely the people who needed those things most. Montgomery Connects, we partner with county departments, probably 20 different organizations. So what we also try to do is that we try to engage in outreach with organizations that are already reaching the communities who need these services most. And we also target them geographically in strategic locations. Our purpose is we have formed a digital equity coalition, and the purpose of that is essentially not reinvent the wheel, to share information and to really strengthen our ability to work together to overcome them. Because a lot of the times what we're seeing is that the issues that people have related to digital equity are similar to the issues that they've had, whether you're with McHale and teaching people or adult English learners, or you're talking with people who have food insecurity, or you have people who need employment services. Just so we have a sense of it, because people think of Montgomery County as being essentially a relatively wealthier county, and we're not really part of it. What this is really showing you is that on the left are the people who do not have a computer, and on the right are the people who do not have home internet access. And what you'll see there is that Montgomery County is 11 to 9%. We are the fourth largest group within the county and within the state. And what's happening is you're hearing a lot of discussion about rural, and it's important because rural, it is more expensive to reach for infrastructure. But when you really look at where the most need is in the four largest county, 2/3 of the people who do not have computers, or rather 1 in 6. 6 and 10 are in those areas. And then in the, if you look on the folks who, I got that wrong, is the no computers on the right. But if you look at the people who do not have internet access, 2/3 of them reside in the 6 counties you can see right there in the middle. So even though we talk about it as a rural problem, it is in fact an urban problem. And in most of that cases, it is more likely a matter that the person does not have funding to pay for that infrastructure, to pay for that service, or that they live in a building where the wiring's too old to get that service effectively. In Montgomery County, what you can see here is you can see that based on some of the census data, we estimate that in the census data, if you look at the census will tell you that 35,000 households do not have a computer. That is households. So if there's more than one person in the household that would need the computer, you would need more computers. In addition, the census underrepresents it because there are a lot of people who have a computer in which it's 20 years old, but for the census's purposes, they have a computer. So looking at the poverty rate, we estimate there are at least 91,000 people in the county over 5 who do not have a computer. There are probably 169,000 if you went by double the poverty rate, which is what you qualify for most of the federal programs is being at that rate. Also in here, if you look at on the internet side, the census data again is low and it's somewhat useless because census broadband includes DSL, which I don't think there's anybody out there who would say that DSL is really an effective form of broadband. If you look at twice the percentage of poverty, households in poverty, or rather 200% of poverty, that's 65,000 households. And ALICE is a term that people use, and it is asset limited, income constrained employed. It's what people used to call the working poor, but what it really means is this is the rate that you need to have to basically break even in the county. And if you look at that, it's about 3 times the poverty rate. So there's probably 98,000 households in the county that do not have sufficient internet. And you can see that these are the distribution of them, that for people who are low income, they're only 21% of the population, but they are 60% of the people without computers. And they are 79% of the people who do not have home internet. The Black and Latino population is 29% of the county, but they are 43% of the people without computers, and they are 41% of the households that do not have home internet. So the problem, and looking at it, it's very targeted, and part of what we really tried to focus on is that we've had events and we really partnered with those community groups so that you could be reaching in particular these groups. The other group that's not on there are older adults, and they also are less likely to be adopters of technology. So here, looking at this, we have distributed 50,000 laptops over the last year using federal grants. 84,000 of those went to households that were earning less than 50,000, 77 to Black and Latino residents. 65% went to Black and Latino residents earning less than 50,000. And there were 15,000 families that were enrolled in ACP. ACP is the Affordable Connectivity Program. It is a federal and Maryland program which will provide up to $45 off your broadband, and that's whether you use a cell phone to get that or you use something like Comcast or Verizon. And for lower income families or families in a limited number of benefit programs, they can also receive another $9.25 towards a telephone or an addition on the broadband. What it also, in looking at this, and this is kind of a breakout, what we've sort of done is we went to analyze that the program's been in place for a little over a year, and it built on another program that had been there for about 10 months. So what this is showing you is we went through and we looked at where were the zip codes that had the highest number of families that have 200% of poverty. And then we looked at where they have the lowest enrollment rates in the ACP program. And so what you're seeing here is that the zip code that's furthest behind is 20906. These other yellow ones are the ones in which they've got over 3,000 households, but less than 30%, or over 2,000 households and less than 20% enrollment. These red households, they have over 900 households and their enrollment's under 40,000. So this is really sort of the areas where we will be targeting the most efforts. And for anybody who's worked in, other types of programs that are intended to reach low-income families, this is not really news. It's sort of across the board is where you may end up. And that is also, so when you look at some of these things of like, why might you see some of these wireless services or some of these things concentrated in some of these areas? Besides the fact that you have urban density, it's also where you have the most demand. And one of the things that we found in distributing the computers is that we asked people if they had a phone, and we asked if they subscribed to mobile service. And while about 80-90% of people said they had a mobile phone, people over 18 we looked at, less than 30% subscribed to a wireless plan. So what a lot of people do is the device only works if you're in a spot where you have Wi-Fi service. So one of the things is that it's not just enough that you're deploying 5G, but you really want to have other programs that are in place that help people make that more affordable. So the enrollment in the ACP program, the county has received, we received a $250,000 grant from the federal government, and we've received some funding from our own Health and Human Services. We are going to be having 110 enrollment events at senior and affordable housing to help people enroll in these programs. And the state of Maryland has also provided us funding, and they are going to be providing us another 34,000 computers. Those computers are going to be limited to one computer per address per eligible household. And so what we're looking to do at those events is to say, if you sign up for the, if you're eligible for the ACP program, you can also be eligible for the computer. We've also separately have a grant from the state. We're distributing 1,000 computers to K through 12 organizations. One of the things also that we did is that we really leaned in on the, I think it's the Center for Urban Policy. And one of the things they said about 5G is that if you're going to have 5G and have it deployed, you want to make sure that those jobs reach your community. So we have, with the help of Congressman David Trone, we've received a $1 million Department of Labor grant. And we are using that to launch a 5G broadband job training boot camp. We are going to be training, I believe it's 75. We're gonna recruit probably 200, and the result is our goal is to get 75 graduates. We are going to be doing specific outreach to look for underemployed Black and Latino youth, to be looking for women, and to support veterans. And it is in partnership with Montgomery College, WorkSource Montgomery, and the Wireless Industry Association. And then lastly, as people mentioned on the FCC maps, we'd like to launch a campaign for people to both do a speed test that will provide information to the state so they can see where the gaps in service are. And then also we will be taking that and adding that info. We filed challenges to the FCC maps, but that will also give us the ability to provide some input and sort of an accuracy of that, of where they have service. It is an issue specifically in the, there are about 20 properties, we believe, that are occupied in the Ag Reserve that do not, they are not already in a grant area, and they do not have wireline service. So we're continuing to work to make sure that everybody has access to high-speed broadband service there. The statewide University of Maryland received $4 million that the state provided in 2021. They're hiring 10 navigators. One of those will be tasked to Montgomery County. We have a hotline. They have a statewide hotline, and they're working on deploying a resource website. And that's what we're using, that as people, they get the internet access and they have the computer, that then they have a place to get skills training. The state has a preliminary plan. That plan's actually going to be due in August. We're trying to provide them input in May. We estimate there'll be about $23 million that the state is going to get for over 5 years. So there's going to be more funding that's needed. So part of what we're trying to do is to emphasize the need for that. The state held a series of workshops, and we participated in that. And that's really going to just be a big focus of getting that into. That plan will guide all of the infrastructure, and the Digital Equity Act funding is going to be driven by that plan. So that's a key benchmark. Lastly, if I can, I'm going to share the sound, and I'm going to play this video.
Very important for you to have a Chromebook.
see if I can.
Because overall, if you have a good grade,
Let me see if I can get the volume. I don't see the volume.
You can hear it, that's fine.
You hear it? Okay, great. Okay, great.
I feel like Chromebooks are meant for researching, and if you research, you could get a better grade. And when you research more and more, I feel like you would have a chance to go to the best place for you. Learning more makes it better for your life. Like, let me tell you a reason. If you keep on learning, you might go to a specific college that you would like and live your life how you want to be. There's so many people in the world that don't have Chromebooks, and I think we should change that.
And then lastly, and there's just the contact information for me.
Great. Thank you very much, Mitsuko. I love that ending. So adorable. I totally agree with her. Now, I want to also thank Theodora Scarato for your presentation. And again, Sabine Neschke, really appreciate your comments. Now it's time for the Q&A portion of the evening. And I want to turn it over to Amelia, but I'd like to ask the first question. So think about this. First, I'm really happy to hear all the ways that the digital divide is being bridged in our county. I love all the stats, and we can kind of go back and really dive into that. But my question is really, so we know that there is this rollout happening, and it's happening across the country. I've been hearing more and more about what's going on with the satellites and this technology and connectivity, and I was wondering if anybody could shed more light on that, because if some people have concerns about this ground game, what's happening in our skies? That's my question. Amelia? While you all think about that, I'll turn it over to Amelia.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you to all of our presenters. So before we get started with the Q&A, I just want to remind the audience that if you want to ask a question, go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question into the box and hit send or return. We're going to try to answer as many questions from as many different attendees as we can while time allows. We are going to end at 8:30. And again, a blanket reminder to be respectful of each other and all of our presenters who are here tonight. So first, unless anyone has a response to Nicole's first question.
I do.
Okay, great.
Okay, so there's a couple satellite technologies out there. The one that sort of seems right now is the most promising. These are low Earth orbit satellites, which means that they're not that far off the ground, and in fact, you can see them with the naked eye going by. And if you're in a place like I have family in Hawaii, and so there's a 10,000 foot volcano, and so at like 7,000 feet, you can actually see them like going by. Elon Musk SpaceX is the biggest proponent of that. What they're sort of working is they kind of have a game where what they've kind of done is they've split the county and they look like little honeycomb sections. What they want to have right now is you can sign up and you can kind of be on the waiting list. But since they've done it in the past 2 years, people are still on the waiting list. It does have promise to provide it, but basically they're constrained in their resources and what they have. So they're sort of, in terms of what they launched first, there's other areas where they've started it. So they haven't reached this, and there's just been some changes and different things that they may have going on there. They have a lot of capacity, but for right now, they're going to limit it to 66 signups per cell. And to give you an idea of it, the Montgomery County Ag Reserve, I think, has about 5 of these cells. You can kind of tell it. So You're talking like 300 people in the ag reserve could get signed up for this service. And then what there's also is there's a federal proceeding in which they basically said, hey, if you want to come to these rural areas and you want to have some grant funding and do some things, and they pitched satellite as a thing to get there. And there's some deadlines that they kind of need to do it within like a 5 or 10 year window, but they haven't reached the end of that yet. So what I just really would say in sum is, it is something that is happening in some places of the country. It is promised that it could work here, but it has not yet launched.
Can I briefly just add to that? Also, in addition to promises that it will connect the unconnected, which is sort of often brought up, there are a lot of other industrial applications for satellites. I believe we have around 5,500 current active satellites in orbit, but there are applications now for 64,000 new and an unprecedented number of applications for novel and industrial uses, kind of like this whole, like we talk about the digital divide, but then we're doing all these other things. When it comes to satellites, something similar is happening. And once again, technology is moving so fast without considering the environmental impacts of all of these new technologies. And there are safer ways to do a lot of the things. I'm not sure about the spying from the satellites and all those other things and so forth, but I just want to mention to viewers, there's a GAO report, Government Accountability Report, on this issue where they talk about the environmental issues that need to be addressed. I mean, this is like, it's like just completely unprecedented what's happening. They talk about in their report increase in orbital debris, space trash, emissions in the upper atmosphere, disruption of astronomy, and a lot of other issues that really need to be addressed. And I believe now the FCC has started a space bureau to begin to look into this. However, as I didn't talk about it in my set, but the FCC is considered a captured agency, reflective of the revolving door between industry and government. So we really need to ensure that with satellites as well, there is a consideration of the environmental effects. And, you know, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. And who's profiting, who's benefiting, who's measuring, all of that needs to be done. And where's the transparency in all of that?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well. I think you both have really great points. I think the capacity up in the skies is going to be a huge point. How much debris we can have, but I'll just add that the way that these small satellites work in comparison to the larger ones, when you have a large enough constellation, they can actually provide constant service down to the ground and avoid some of the worries of, you know, if the weather is bad, can they still reach you? The way that they can interact with each other and make links with the data. We actually will be able to have the capacity in a few years once those satellite constellations are deployed. And they can actually reach speeds that are comparable to fiber or 5G networks, you know, with the right size of constellation again, and I think that'll happen in a few years. But yeah, I just want to say, like, it's an exciting opportunity, both for just connecting more people, but especially in rural areas where we can't get as much, where infrastructure just can't be built out as fast or as cheaply. It is a really great way that we're seeing it to actually be a possibility of connecting those areas and providing coverage across the entire country. So just want to put that in there as well.
Thank you very much. So there have been a couple questions in the Q&A about why 5G and not why other technologies are not being pushed as much, it seems. I guess like fiber as well, and wired technology rather than wireless. So would the panel like to talk about, you know, how scalable some of these alternative solutions are for different communities, rural, suburban, urban, and if, you know, if there is a way to get people more connected without having to rely on as much 5G deployment at this point.
Yeah, and I think I started answering one of these questions or a similar one, how fiber cables will actually be a strong backbone for 5G technology. So I do think infrastructure build out of these wired options and having the fiber optic cables laid out across the county will actually be important to distributing 5G or whatever the future generation is. I think we're going to see that being a really important part of things. And then as for why the 5G push, at least we're seeing on a larger scale competition with other countries that are developing now 6 or even 8G. We're getting behind a little bit on our technology and how quickly we can deploy it. So I think it's important that we continue to push for faster, greater connectivity with ensuring that we're not leaving anyone behind.
I totally agree with Sabine. The wireless is powered by wire. You have to have wired, you have essentially, these are antennas connected to wiring. So you're not escaping the wiring. The real issue is, are you using the wires to to go into the home, or are you using a 5G connection? Right now, the wired connection is still better. It packs more punch. You can serve more people than you can with the wireless. But you'll see it mostly as a business alternative, that there can be people who it provides another piece of competition. Everybody in the county has almost everybody has 2 carriers. Some people have 3 carriers. This provides another one. But I think the other thing to think about on the 4G and the 5G is when we look at 3G was really bringing internet to your computer, and 4G was bringing internet to your mobile phone, and 5G is bringing it to devices. There are things that developed, thinking of like Uber and Lyft and Grubhub and all these things. They are essentially capable because you have a geolocation thing within your phone that allows it to connect to a credit card that you have in there, and that you can identify that it's you. And so that sort of led to all these other things that are essentially powered by 4G technology, but they weren't, when you deployed 4G, people didn't know that's what they were going to get. So for 5G, there's a lot of more things. And to be honest, a lot of the things that are going to be powered by 5G, they're not that big bandwidth. Yes, there's still video and video streaming, but what you're going to see a lot more of are device integration in the home. So people's ability to use a Nest that has a little sensor that tells you whether somebody's walking around. You can have a Wi-Fi device. You can use it as like, hey, this is my mom and she lives by herself. Has she gotten up today? There's a thing that can do it. You can have, if you want to have a camera, you can, your kids' things, all those kinds of things. The Ring, doorbells, a new big game changer is really going to be adding the video screen to an Alexa or that type of thing. So it's not just a voice, but your ability to kind of see and do things. And those are going to be big innovations for older adults. And then the last thing will be a lot of virtual reality health apps and virtual reality 3Ds. And part of what you're going to see a lot of 5G, if you look in Taiwan and other places, you'll see them within like a large hospital. So they're not sending these really big, radiology things. They're not leaving the hospital and having to travel back. And they're using them as overlays within surgery. So I think that actually what you'll see is the biggest applications will be industrial and the healthcare, and you'll see these innovations in the home. The things in the home are not going to take that much bandwidth up. But really, it's just a business. And that's the sort of in the federal government, it's sort of we live in a capitalist society that promotes competition instead of regulation. So the idea that, well, I have these 2 wireline providers, here's another choice for people. They could, if they didn't like one of those, they could get as good a service from T-Mobile or AT&T. That's really sort of what's driving it. And just for what it's worth, the House Energy and Commerce Committee today announced that they rolled up 28 different telecom bills into a single one, and almost all of them further gut the ability of local governments to regulate anything. They did not have any local governments or any state people testify about that bill, and what they're basically saying is, we have $64 billion that we're going to invest in getting broadband out, because when we left it to markets, they left people behind. And the latest solution is, and you know what we should also do, is we should make even less government regulation of it.
I'd like to add to that what you're just saying, that the stripping of local government authority has been going on for many years. In 2019, there was stripping away of what local and city and municipalities could do. But this is one reason why we all need to get involved in these political issues, which are really personal. And I just want to go to a few things that were brought up. So you have the fiber optic. That goes off into the pole, up the pole, and then it comes out in the 5G. But that should be going to and through to homes and in homes, so that people can use faster, safer, and more secure wireless whenever possible. It is faster. It also uses less energy compared to wireless. And a lot of the applications, like for example, I use Uber a lot, and I actually do it from my computer, which I have wired. I don't connect to the outside. I am, privileged to have all affordable service and so forth. But, these cameras, the doorbells, the video screens, all of those things actually could be in fixed locations like your home, or even, my mother-in-law, when we needed a camera, wired. It doesn't all have to be wireless where it's reaching out to an antenna outside. There's a lot of ways that our networks could be designed to be safer as well. Even in hospitals, there's talk about, we need 5G to do brain surgery. And there was a big splash in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times with a promotion for 5G by companies with a picture of someone with a brain tumor. Now, I would not want to have surgery using wireless for many reasons. One, what if something happens? That can all be wired. You can even do wired virtual reality if there's a cord. And if I were a doctor, I would hope, there'd be a choice to do that in case there were a problem with the connection, because fiber doesn't, wired corded connections don't have that. So we are recommending promoting wired, so we don't have to have so much everything wireless, like these fixed wireless things that you were just describing. Actually, the companies are all trying to move to that. They're even trying to get away from having service that comes in with a line and instead having it come from an outside antenna. But again, you have to upgrade all of those devices. We're talking about 5G, but we are so behind the times. They're already on to 6 and 7G. I think the FCC has pulled out, is it like the terahertz spectrum for experimental purposes? And, we need to just slow down, rethink, be transparent, and use safe technology as much as possible. And the companies really can design networks that are safer, communication networks, systems and devices. But there needs to be public pressure. And with any environmental issue, it is under-resourced communities, Black and Brown communities, that are going to be most impacted. And I didn't even talk about the impacts from synergistic effects like air pollution combined with non-ionizing electromagnetic exposure, of which there's studies showing increased harm. So I think all of this sounds great. It's magical and wonderful sounding, but we need to have some safeguards, some in place, like we have bikes, helmets with bikes, and before we just run and race to something without the proper review, because you were just talking about how the federal government is doing all these changes to promote 5G, but they're not even looking at all of the science, not the FDA, the EPA, the CDC. No one's looking at all of the science to ensure safety.
Thank you very much. So for the next question, there was someone who mentioned, I think one of your slides, Sabine, in your presentation, how the permitting processes can be a roadblock to 5G. And I'm glad they brought this up because permitting is also an aspect of this that I'm curious about, because it's kind of one of the few tools that local governments have at their disposal to control how technology is dispersed, to, increase connectivity, or to, use to disperse technology if it has been evaluated in some way. It's kind of a check or a hurdle that industry has to go through itself. But also permits are often publicly available. So it's also a way for the public to find out about these infrastructure projects that are being constructed. So is it better, do you have any comments as to this person's question? Is it better for these permitting processes to be speeded up? Montgomery County has recently changed its own zoning regulations about where cell antennas can be placed. So if the panelists can maybe speak to the permitting factor, that would be great.
Yeah, and I'll let the other panelists speak to this because I don't know it as well at a local level. I'll open it up.
So the permitting process, one is that particularly for small cells, there are different shot clocks that will apply based on the size and whether they are located within the public rights of way. The public rights of way typically include the sidewalks. So there's, in general, the county wants to have an efficient permitting process, but there are specific shot clocks that will apply.
Can I add that the permitting process has to do with the ZTAs, the zoning changes that have happened, so that there's that in addition to the shot clocks, they're allowed to be closer. And I know that there are community groups that have identified many problems in the permits that have gone unchecked. And permits that were permitted in one way and the antenna might be closer than it was supposed to be, or not at the right address, or didn't follow all the permitting things that were stated in the application. And there's really a lack, as I understand it, of oversight or of checking on these permits, and that there's complete follow through related to that. And really not a lot of meaningful community participation in that process, especially with these new fast track zoning.
Well, I want to, there is no specific there isn't a specific fast track within permitting. The permitting follows the same process for permitting that other applications are required to follow. What's really trying to happen is that is to address the length of time before you get to permitting. The thing I want to also point out is that we do not have a process in the county where anytime any work is done, that there is a public input process, public notification. There is a specific process when someone is asking for an exemption to the rules or some kind of change, that then there is an input process. But the point of having, the point of creating a zoning code which says you have to live within these certain limits is that there is an assumption that if you file something that's within those rules, that it can move forward. And I think that there have been a lot of changes, particularly in the last 5 years, in the permitting process, in the other process, to ensure that the information that's being submitted in applications is consistent, and that what is going, and I think what the next phase of it is to really focus more on ensuring that what people got approval for is in fact what you end up with. And there's been several checks and balances that have been instituted.
Thank you very much.
I don't completely agree with that. I mean, I guess maybe it's a way of perspective, because there used to be a way that it wouldn't have been allowed to put a cell tower, a short, small cell, so close to a home. It would have had to be more of a process. Now that process has been changed by the zoning code. I mean, tell me if I'm right, so that there is not the same process that there used to be for an application 30 feet from homes. Now, there's no routine hearings or routine notice as there used to be because of those changes. I mean, do I have that right? That allow cell towers, short cell towers called small cells.
Small cells. Oh, it
Yeah.
depends. I mean, when the zoning code was updated, what the zoning code was originally drafted for were 100-foot towers. So there was a move of these 100-foot towers, 150-foot towers. They should not be in residential areas. Over a period of years, council amended those zoning rules so that they were looking to get at these antennas that could replace street lights or be placed on something that's about the equivalent of like 35 feet up. The council, those are the choices that the council made in implementing it. They were not changes that the county executive had supported, but that is the democracy we live in, and those are the zoning rules that we have to live under. But it wasn't, what I would push back on is, I don't believe that every one of these things would have necessarily had a special hearing. But there was really a move to say that where you are replacing existing structures, so where you have a street light, where you have where you have a street light pole, those things, or you're adding an antenna to a utility pole, that those are the things that they're really looking at.
Yeah, I'm talking about the small cells. Those would have had a different process. Now, by right, they can go up. There's not the kind of process there used to be. That was eliminated with these zoning changes. Those small
Right, but
cells in front of your home.
the process that was there is that there was almost nothing that went through that process, because it wasn't a process that was designed for it wasn't designed for placing things on utility poles or streetlights. It was designed for, I'm putting it in a giant field.
Right. Well, other communities are doing 250 feet, more feet, or they're saying that there has to be.
Those are things.
I'm sorry, let me finish. Or they're ensuring that the data gaps have to be documented before putting them in, because what's happening now is they're able to go in without documentation that there's a need to put it in, which would have been part of some of the processes before. So I think, just to clarify,
I do not believe you can enforce a legal requirement. You do not have to. There are court cases. The county has ability on aesthetics to enforce on aesthetics. We do not have legal authority to require that there is a need.
There is legal authority to have a series of procedures that are in place that could have been done, or to have preferred placements, for example, or to engage the community. So I do not think that cell antennas had to be 30 feet in order to fulfill the federal rules that were put forward, unless maybe, and there's been no documentation of that, just to be clear. It didn't have to be 30 feet, and there could have been preferred placements.
That is correct. And those were the decisions that the previous council made.
Okay, thank you both very much. We have time for about maybe one more question. One person asked how, if households in the county are without home broadband access, how many of these homes do not have access to wire broadband technology passing through their home at all? How would they be able to sign up for some of the county's programs then to get better connected? And another attendee asked if these programs that have been put forward by the county so far could improve internet access in further out areas such as Poolsville or Darnestown, or the areas near Sugarloaf Mountain, as well as in Down County. Oh, I think you're on mute.
two different questions there. So one is for people to get information and to sign up for the programs. They can go to the county's website /Montgomery Connects, or they can go to the county's website /ACP, and there's information about how to sign up for those programs. There's a new website, and I'm forgetting it off the top of my head, for the federal program. You can also call 311 and they'll direct you to our office and we can provide assistance for that. For the majority of people who do not have internet access most likely have access to wireline service. That is why focusing on enrolling people in the Affordable Connectivity Program and getting them signed up for the discounts is such an important priority to the county. And in the rural areas, the county has been working, the state has had several rounds of grant funding. Verizon has a Connect America Fund grant to wire, mostly in the Potomac area. Comcast just received a grant application to wire another, I think it's going to be 35 or 40 homes. They haven't given the official notice of that. We think that the number of homes that are not in a grant area or not wired is low. As I said, I think it's around 20 that we have right now. For people who are looking for better service, the best thing I would suggest is if you call 311 and you ask for the cable complaint form, to submit that form to the county, and we can do an investigation about that service level. We also want to ensure that these are areas where we're documenting the way the federal rule is set up is the priority are places that do not have 25 megabits by 3 megabits, and then it will be areas that do not have 100 by 20. So 100 down and 20 up. So what we want to have is as much information as possible from people about where those areas are so that we can further work, particularly in the rural areas, to ensure that everybody has access.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question. So a lot of our attendees tonight have mentioned possible concerns of health effects of cell phone radiation. And we've heard tonight that there has been new research over the last few decades studying possible health effects of cell phone radiation, yet federal guidelines for radiation levels have not changed since the 90s. So kind of putting it to the panel, what can local governments do with that information when they have to make decisions based on health and safety and environmental safety? And what can residents do with that information when federal standards, normal federal agencies, or maybe international agencies for health and science have not changed their standing, yet people still maybe have some concerns about, how they should be making decisions on technology and infrastructure as it may affect in the environment and public health.
Well, I'll go. I have no one's unmuting.
Yes,
I'll just say that we, every elected official at every level, I think at the local and the state level, should be pressuring the Federal Communications Commission to do its job and to be accountable. There needs to be a look at all the science. They need to engage our federal agencies. The New Hampshire Commission on 5G laid out. You can go to their report, recommendations for federal, state, local, which would include look at all the science, develop limits that protect birds and bees, reduce exposure in the meantime, and companies need to make safer technology. And I think that local governments, there should be measuring and monitoring for the RF levels around those cell antennas. We're not doing that. We're not doing any field measuring. We're not doing yearly checks We're not checking that those rooftop antennas are safe for people who live in the buildings or near the buildings with any kind of regularity. And there's no health surveillance on if people are reporting symptoms or, long-term studies that are being done by the county or in fact by the US government, which has pretty much defunded for many years. So there needs to be monitoring of the RF levels. There needs to be more accountability. And I also think there needs to be preferred placements for these. We don't have to have it right in front of our home to be connected. Actually, you don't need it to be 30 feet from your home. So why is it? And all of those. So I would say go to Environmental Health Trust for more. We have a lot of that information as well. I think many hands make light work here. And I think there should be a reversal of ZTA, of all of those ZTAs, and a relook at this issue. Montgomery County should protect the public and the environment. I guess that's what I think. And I will mute myself.
I'll say that Montgomery County we filed motions, or not motions, but we filed comments in the FCC probably over 10 years, specifically asking them to update the standards. And I think at the end, what they did is they took their standards and said, looks good to us. I think it was good. The Environmental Health Trust was part of the lawsuit, which I think on administrative grounds, that was overturned as insufficient. Kind of lost track of where that's at. But the county has done some field studies of deployments. We have looked at some apartment buildings, measured them. They are within the standards. The issue for us is that until the federal rules change, what we have is the ability to enforce those standards. And the distance and what people need, I mean, I think that can vary in different circumstances. And we certainly would like to have them be further back from people's houses whenever possible and to be in areas that are the least obtrusive.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I just think it's so important for everyone's voices to be heard, and as constituents to local, state, federal elected officials, your voice really matters and you'll have sway on how decisions are made. Groups like League of Women Voters are really helpful in collecting all these voices together too, if there's an issue that's been raised, and going to the local community with that information. And just, spreading, whether it's health or environmental reasons, you see concerns. I think there's also benefits to how this technology is helping with health and environmental reasons. We're able to access more telehealth. We have more data on how the environment's being affected. So weighing the benefits and the concerns is really important. But obviously, if there are concerns, raising those will be huge.
Thank you all so much. I think that's all we have time for. We're a few minutes over, so I'm going to throw it back to Nicole to close us out for tonight.
Yes, thank you very much to all of our esteemed presenters. I really learned a lot from each one of you, so thank you so much. I hope the public, you take this home and review it, and as they were saying, raise your voices if this matters to you. So again, I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this free program and want to learn more about the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County, you can visit us by going to LWVMOCOMD.org, and you can find out more about our advocacy. With that, I will thank you again and say good night to everyone. Take care.